rain fell heavily that night, soaking the empty street in silence. Under a weak streetlight, an elderly woman stood trembling, her clothes wet and worn, clinging to her frail body like a second skin that offered no warmth. Her hands shook as she quietly begged for help, her voice barely louder than the rain, a whisper lost in the storm. People passed by without stopping, their umbrellas tilted forward, their eyes fixed on the pavement ahead. Some looked away the moment they saw her, turning their faces towards shop windows or suddenly finding something urgent on their phones. Some pretended not to notice, walking faster, their footsteps splashing through puddles as if speed could erase what they had seen. Her eyes were tired, but gentle, carrying decades of stories that no one had time to hear. She lowered her head in shame, whispering softly, "Please, anything will help," the words dissolving into the night like breath on cold glass. Rain mixed with tears on her face as she tried to stay strong, each drop a reminder of how far she had fallen, how invisible she had become. Despite everything, she held into her dignity, standing straight even as her body begged to collapse, praying silently that this night would somehow pass. That morning would bring mercy, or at least the strength to endure one more day. Suddenly, bright headlights cut through the rain, piercing the darkness like a blade through fabric. A luxury car slowed to a stop nearby, its engine purring softly, expensive and out of place on this forgotten street. The door opened slowly, almost hesitantly, as if the person inside was unsure of what they were about to face. A well-dressed man stepped out, his tailored suit immediately darkened by the rain, his leather shoes splashing into a shallow puddle, and he froze the moment his eyes landed on her. His breath caught in his throat, trapped there like something too painful to release. His heart began to pound, each beat louder than the last, echoing in his chest like a drum warning him of what he already knew but refused to believe. "Mother," he whispered, the word barely escaping his lips, fragile and broken. His body stiffened as disbelief washed over him, cold and paralyzing, spreading through his veins like ice water. The woman standing there, drenched and trembling, begging in the rain with her head bowed in shame, was the same woman who once gave him everything, the same hands that had fed him, held him, sacrificed for him, without ever asking for anything in return. He had not always lived a life of comfort. Once he was just a poor boy raised by a devoted mother, growing up in a cramped apartment where the walls were thin and the winters were cold, where dinner was often rice and whatever vegetables she could afford at the end of the day. She worked endlessly, taking any job she could find, cleaning offices late into the night, washing clothes for neighbors, standing for hours at a market stall selling fruit just to earn enough to keep them going. She often skipped meals so he could eat, pushing her own plate toward him with a smile, telling him she had already eaten, though he would later realize she was lying, that her stomach was as empty as his had been. She believed in him when no one else did, when teachers said he was just another poor kid who would amount to nothing, when neighbors whispered that he should quit school and start working, when the world seemed designed to keep people like them exactly where they were. She would sit with him at night under a single dim bulb, helping him with homework she barely understood herself, encouraging him to dream bigger than their circumstances, telling him that education was the only way out, the only ladder that poverty could not take away from him. Through struggle and determination, he built his future, studying by candlelight when the electricity was cut off, walking miles to school to save bus fare, working part-time jobs while keeping his grades high, refusing to let exhaustion or hunger or doubt stop him from climbing. Success followed, slowly at first, then faster, as doors began to open, as opportunities he had once only imagined became real, as his hard work transformed into scholarships, then degrees, then positions, then power. Money came more than he had ever thought possible, more than his mother had earned in her entire lifetime, flowing into his accounts like a river that never stopped. Respect followed from colleagues, from strangers, from people who once would not have given him a second glance, who now shook his hand and called him sir, who asked for his advice and praised his vision. Even after becoming powerful, he never forgot where he came from, never let wealth erase the memory of those cold nights and empty stomachs, never stopped hearing his mother's voice telling him to stay humble, to remember those who helped him rise. His mother was his foundation, the bedrock upon which everything he had become was built. Every success a testament to her sacrifice, every achievement a reflection of her faith in him. She was his strength, the reason he pushed forward when others would have given up, the face he saw in his mind whenever doubt crept in, reminding him that someone had believed in him before he even believed in himself, that someone had given up everything so that he could have a chance at something more. As his life changed, everything around him seemed perfect, like a dream that had finally come true after years of struggle and sacrifice. He lived well in a house with tall windows and marble floors, with rooms he did not need and luxuries he had once only seen in magazines, surrounded by comfort that felt surreal even after years of enjoying it. People admired his success, stopping him at events to shake his hand, congratulating him on his achievements, asking him for advice on investments and business strategies, treating him like someone who had figured out the secret formula to life. They praised his family and admired his home, commenting on how tastefully decorated everything was, how well-behaved his children seemed, how elegant and poised his wife appeared at charity galas and social gatherings, holding his arm with a smile that photographers loved to capture. From the outside, everything looked peaceful, like a portrait of the perfect life, the kind of existence that magazines wrote articles about, that neighbors envied, that strangers dreamed of achieving for themselves. Smiles were everywhere, bright and constant, flashing across faces during dinner parties and holiday celebrations, filling photo frames on mantels and walls, creating an illusion of endless joy and harmony. Laughter filled the rooms, echoing through hallways during gatherings, ringing out when guests told stories over wine, bouncing off expensive furniture and crystal chandeliers, making everything seem warm and alive and whole. His wife entertained beautifully, her voice melodic as she welcomed people into their home, her manners impeccable, her appearance always flawless. Never a hair out of place, never a moment of visible stress or frustration. His children attended the best schools, wore the finest clothes, spoke politely to adults, performed well in their activities, becoming the kind of children that other parents pointed to as examples of what success could create. No one suspected that something dark was slowly growing behind closed doors, festering in silence, hidden beneath layers of politeness and carefully maintained appearances, spreading like rot in wood that looked solid from the outside, but was crumbling from within. No one saw the coldness that crept into conversations when guests left, the distance that grew wider with each passing year, the way love had been replaced by routine, by tolerance, by a performance so convincing that even he sometimes forgot it was not real, that the warmth was an act, that the family he had built on his mother's sacrifices had become something hollow, something beautiful but empty, something that looked like everything but felt like nothing at all. When he was away, things began to change, shifting like shadows when light moves, revealing what had always been hidden beneath the surface of the polite smiles and careful words. Warmth disappeared from the house the moment his car pulled out of the driveway, replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with temperature, a coldness that settled into the air like fog, thick and suffocating. Voices grew cold, sharp and clipped, losing the gentle tones they carried when he was present, transforming into something harsh and impatient, dripping with contempt that had been swallowed down and stored up, waiting to be released. Kindness faded as if it had never existed, as if it had been nothing more than a performance, a mask worn for his benefit that could be discarded the moment he was no longer there to see, no longer there to question, no longer there to protect. His mother was treated as a burden, an unwanted guest in a home that had once been built on her sacrifices, spoken to as if she were invisible, as if her presence was an inconvenience that everyone had to tolerate, but no one wanted to acknowledge. Food became limited, portions shrinking until they barely qualified as meals. Leftovers given to her cold and congealed, while the family ate fresh and warm at the dining table, her plate always the last to be filled and the first to be taken away. Simple needs were denied, requests for medicine dismissed with irritation, complaints of pain met with rolled eyes and sighs, her discomfort treated as exaggeration, her suffering minimized and mocked behind closed doors where he could not hear. She was told to stay quiet, warned that causing trouble would only make things worse, reminded constantly that she was living in their house, eating their food, relying on their charity, as if everything she had given had been erased, as if her years of sacrifice meant nothing compared to their current generosity. To be grateful, they insisted, their voices dripping with false sweetness when he was around, turning venomous when he left, telling her she should be thankful for the roof over her head, the bed she slept in, the scraps of food they gave her, as if basic dignity was a gift they were bestowing rather than a debt they could never repay. To not complain, they warned her repeatedly, their eyes narrowing with threat, their words coated in menace, making it clear that speaking up would result in consequences, that telling him the truth would only make her situation more unbearable, that silence was her only protection, her only chance at the survival in a house that had become her prison. She learned to make herself smaller, to move through rooms like a ghost, to avoid eye contact, to speak only when spoken to anticipate their moods and adjust her behavior accordingly. Reading the tension in the air like a language she had been forced to learn. The insults came in whispers at first, then grew bolder. Comments about her age, her slowness, her uselessness, her inability to contribute. Words designed to break her spirit, to make her believe she deserved this treatment, that she was lucky anyone tolerated her at all. Fear became her constant companion, living in her chest like a stone, weighing her down, making every moment uncertain, every interaction a potential danger. Never knowing when kindness might turn to cruelty, when patience might snap into violence, when the fragile peace might shatter into something worse. At night she lay awake in her small room, the one farthest from theirs, the one with the broken heater and the window that would not close completely, letting in cold air that made her bones ache. At night she whispered prayers, her lips moving silently in the darkness, her hands clasped together beneath thin blankets that provided little warmth, speaking to a God she hoped was still listening, still watching, still capable of mercy, asking only for strength to survive another day, not for rescue, not for justice, not for her son to see the truth, but simply for the ability to endure, to wake up tomorrow and face whatever cruelty awaited her, to hold on just a little longer, to not give up even when giving up seemed like the only relief available, to stay alive even when living had become something closer to slow death, measured out in insults and cold meals and lonely nights where no one came to check if she was breathing, if she was warm, if she was still there at all. The nights became unbearable, stretching endlessly before her like a dark road with no destination, each one harder than the last, each one stealing a little more of whatever strength she had left. Rain poured endlessly, drumming against windows and rooftops, filling gutters and flooding streets, turning the world into a cold, wet prison where even the sky seemed to weep for what she had become. Cold crept into her bones, settling deep where no blanket could reach, making her joints ache and her fingers tremble, reminding her that her body was failing, that time and cruelty were slowly wearing her down to nothing. The house that should have been her refuge had become a place of silent torture, where every day brought new humiliations, new reminders that she was unwanted, that her presence was tolerated but never welcomed, that the people living under this roof wished she would simply disappear. Hunger gnawed at her constantly, a persistent companion that never left, twisting her stomach into knots, making her dizzy when she stood too quickly, robbing her of the energy she needed just to move from room to room. The small portions they gave her were never enough, calculated to keep her alive but never satisfied, measured out with precision that felt deliberately cruel, as if even her basic need for food was too much to ask. She learned to drink water to fill the emptiness, to go to bed early so she would not have to feel the hunger as acutely, to distract herself with memories of better times when food was scarce, But love was abundant. When poverty had been hard, but dignity had remained intact. One night when the insults had been particularly harsh and the food particularly scarce, when the cold had seeped so deeply into her bones that she could not stop shaking, she made a decision that broke her heart even as she knew it was necessary. She stood quietly at the back door, looking out at the rain, knowing what she had to do. Knowing that survival sometimes meant swallowing pride, that living sometimes required accepting shame. Hungry and weak, her legs barely able to support her weight, she wrapped herself in the thinnest coat she owned, the one they had given her because it was too worn for anyone else to wear, and stepped out into the storm. The rain hit her immediately, soaking through fabric that provided no protection, running down her face and neck, mixing with tears she could no longer hold back. She walked slowly toward the main street, each step an act of courage and defeat, each breath a prayer for forgiveness, for understanding, for the strength to do what needed to be done. She stood on the corner under a weak streetlight, whispering prayers under her breath, asking God why her life had come to this, why the son she had raised with such love and sacrifice did not know what was happening to her, why the world had become so cruel to someone who had only ever tried to be kind. She asked for nothing more than mercy, not for wealth or comfort or even justice, just for enough to eat, for a warm place to sleep, for someone to see her as a human being worthy of basic dignity and compassion. Each passing night felt heavier than the last, weighing on her soul like stones piled one on top of another, crushing her slowly, making it harder to remember who she used to be, who she had been before hunger and cold and shame had reduced her to this, standing in the rain with her hand extended, begging strangers for coins while her own son slept in a mansion built on the foundation of her sacrifices. That night, he returned without warning, his business trip cut short by an instinct he could not explain, a nagging feeling in his chest that something was wrong, that he needed to go home, even though logic told him there was no reason to leave early. Rain poured as his car stopped at the intersection near his neighborhood, the wipers working frantically to clear the windshield. The streets nearly empty, except for a few shadows moving through the storm. His eyes lifted, drawn by something he could not name, scanning the sidewalk out of habit, and his world collapsed in an instant, time freezing as his brain struggled to process what he was seeing, refusing to believe even as recognition hit him like a physical blow. There she was, standing under that weak streetlight, her silhouette unmistakable even through the rain, even with her head bowed and her shoulders hunched against the cold. Begging, her trembling hand extended toward strangers who passed without stopping. Her voice too soft to hear, but her posture speaking volumes about how far she had fallen. Soaked, her clothes clinging to her frail body, her hair plastered to her face, rain running down her cheeks in rivers that could have been tears or could have been just water. Impossible to tell. Both equally devastating. Broken, every line of her body screaming exhaustion and defeat, the proud woman who had raised him reduced to this, standing in the rain asking strangers for mercy while living in luxury just blocks away. The cruelty of it so profound, it felt unreal. His heart shattered, breaking into pieces so small he wondered if they could ever be put back together, the pain radiating through his chest like something physical, like his body was being torn apart from the inside. He threw the car into park without thinking, not caring that he was blocking traffic, not caring about anything except getting to her, reaching her, understanding how this had happened, how the world had turned so completely upside down. He rushed forward, his expensive shoes splashing through puddles, his suit soaking through immediately, rain blinding him as he ran toward the one person who mattered more than anything, more than success, more than money, more than the perfect life he thought he had built. He fell to his knees in front of her, not caring about the dirty water, not caring who saw, not caring about dignity or appearances or anything except the woman standing before him looking like a stranger, like someone he had failed so completely he did not know if forgiveness was even possible. His hands reached for hers, feeling how cold they were, how thin, how they shook not just from the rain, but from weakness, from hunger, from suffering he had been too blind to see. "Mother, what happened to you?" The words came out broken, choked with tears he could not control, his voice cracking on every syllable, his eyes searching her face for answers he was terrified to hear. She looked down at him, recognition flooding her features, shock and shame and something like relief all mixing together, her lips trembling as she tried to speak but could not, as decades of love and sacrifice and recent torment all collided in this single moment under the rain, with her son on his knees before her, finally seeing what had been hidden, finally understanding the price she had paid for his blindness. Inside the house, everything came to a halt, the comfortable rhythm of the evening shattering the moment he walked through the doors, carrying his mother in his arms, her wet clothes dripping onto the expensive marble floor that suddenly seemed obscene in its luxury. Voices rose immediately, his wife's the first, sharp with surprise and irritation, asking why he was home early, why he was tracking water through the house, why he was carrying that woman like she was something precious when she had been nothing but trouble. He did not answer her, his jaw clenched so tight it ached, his eyes scanning the warm, bright rooms where his family sat comfortable and dry, where food was abundant and heat flowed freely, while his mother had been standing in the rain, begging for coins to survive. Truths surfaced like bodies rising from deep water, ugly and undeniable, as he began to ask questions in a voice that trembled with barely controlled rage. "When did you last feed her? Why is she so thin? Where are the clothes I bought for her? Why was she outside in the rain?" Each question landed like a hammer blow, and with each one, the carefully constructed facade began to crack, revealing the rot beneath. Lies collapsed under the weight of his fury and his mother's silence, the excuses tumbling out in frantic rushes. She chose not to eat. She preferred to be alone. She was being dramatic. She never told us she needed anything. Each one more pathetic than the last, each one crumbling the moment he looked at his mother's face and saw the truth written there in bruises of the soul that no words could hide. His wife's voice grew defensive, then angry, accusing him of believing an old woman over his own family, reminding him of everything she had done for him, how she had stood by his side, how she had given him children and a beautiful home and a perfect life. But he was not listening anymore. His attention focused on the details he had been too blinded to see before. The way his mother flinched when his wife moved too quickly. The way she kept her eyes down as if expecting punishment. The way her hands shook, not just from cold, but from fear. From months of living in terror in a house that should have been her sanctuary. Faces turned pale as he turned to his children, asking them what they had seen, what they had known, watching as guilt and shame flooded their features, as they looked away unable to meet his eyes, unable to defend what they had allowed to happen through their silence and complicity. His daughter's lip trembled as she whispered that she had wanted to say something, that she had known it was wrong, but mother had told her not to interfere, had said it was not her business, had made it clear that speaking up would only cause problems. His son stared at the floor, his face red with shame, admitting in a voice barely above a whisper that he had heard the insults, had seen the small portions of food, had known his grandmother was suffering, but had convinced himself it was not that bad, that she was old and complaining, that his mother knew best. The words hung in the air like poison, each admission another nail in the coffin of the family he thought he had known. The perfect life revealed as nothing more than a beautiful lie built on the suffering of the one person who deserved his protection most. No one spoke after that, the silence stretching thick and suffocating through rooms that suddenly felt too small, too bright, too warm, obscenely comfortable, while his mother had been freezing and starving just beyond their walls. His wife opened her mouth to speak again, to defend herself, to shift blame, but he held up a hand to stop her. His voice, when it finally came low and cold and filled with a disgust that made her step back. "She gave everything so I could have a life," he said, each word deliberate and heavy as stone. "She starved so I could eat. She worked until her hands bled so I could go to school. She believed in me when the world said I was nothing." His voice grew louder, filling the house with a rage that had been building since the moment he saw her in the rain. And you, all of you, treated her like garbage, like she was nothing, like her life meant nothing, while living in a house built on her sacrifices. The truth could no longer be hidden, laid bare in all its ugly reality, impossible to deny or excuse or explain away. Standing there in the form of a trembling old woman whose wet clothes dripped onto marble floors, whose sunken eyes told stories of cruelty that should never have existed in a home filled with so much abundance. The family that had seemed so perfect hours ago now stood exposed as something hollow and cruel, their beautiful masks stripped away to reveal the monsters underneath. People who could smile at charity galas while starving an old woman in their own home, who could preach kindness to strangers while denying basic dignity to family, who could live with themselves while someone suffered just rooms away. Her cries for help silenced by threats and shame and the complicity of people who knew better but chose comfort over conscience. He stood still, calm but firm, the storm of rage that had filled him moments before now settling into something colder, harder, more permanent than anger. A resolve forged in the recognition that some choices define who you are, and some betrayals cannot be forgiven or forgotten. This ends now, he said, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that made everyone in the room understand that something fundamental had shifted, that the man who had left for his business trip was not the same man standing before them, that what had been broken tonight could never be repaired. His wife began to speak, her voice rising in protest, in justification, in desperate attempts to salvage what was slipping away. But he cut her off with a look so cold it froze the words in her throat, making it clear that nothing she said would matter, that her explanations and excuses and manipulations no longer had power over him. He chose his mother, turning to where she sat wrapped in blankets, someone who had finally brought, her eyes wide with confusion and fear about what her presence had unleashed, what destruction her suffering had caused to the family she had never wanted to hurt. He knelt beside her, taking her thin, cold hands in his, telling her softly that she would never spend another night afraid, another day hungry, another moment wondering if she was wanted or loved or safe. He chose compassion over comfort, duty over convenience, the woman who had given him life over the woman who had given him status, making a decision that would cost him his marriage, possibly his relationship with his children, certainly the perfect image he had cultivated so carefully over the years. He walked away from cruelty, literally and metaphorically, helping his mother to her feet and guiding her toward the door, ignoring his wife's increasingly frantic pleas, her promises that things would change, her threats about what this decision would cost him, her tears that seemed less about remorse than about losing the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to maintaining. His children watched in silence, understanding perhaps for the first time that actions have consequences, that cruelty witnessed is cruelty participated in, that their father was choosing principle over peace, love over loyalty to people who had proven themselves unworthy of either. He paused at the door only long enough to tell them that his lawyer would be in contact, that they could keep the house and everything in it, that he wanted nothing from this place except his mother and his dignity, both of which should never have been at risk in the first place. Then he walked out into the rain that was finally beginning to ease, carrying nothing but the clothes on his back and the woman who mattered most, leaving behind the beautiful lie of his perfect life for the harder truth of doing what was right, regardless of the cost. Weeks later, life felt different, stripped of the excess and pretense that had once seemed so important, reduced to something simpler and somehow infinitely more valuable, more real, more worth protecting than anything he had accumulated in his years of chasing success. They lived simply in a modest apartment that would have seemed impossibly small compared to the mansion he had left behind, but felt more like home than that vast, cold house had ever been. Every corner filled with warmth that had nothing to do with expensive heating systems and everything to do with love that was finally allowed to exist without performance or pretense. The furniture was secondhand, the kitchen was tiny, the view was nothing special, but none of that mattered because his mother smiled when she woke up there, because she moved through the rooms without fear, because she could open the refrigerator without asking permission, because she existed without apology in a space that was truly hers. They ate together, every meal a small ceremony of reconnection, sitting across from each other at a simple wooden table, sharing food that was modest but abundant, prepared with care and eaten without rush, without the tension that had poisoned every meal in that other life. She cooked sometimes when she felt strong enough, her hands remembering recipes from his childhood, filling the apartment with smells that brought back memories of when they had been poor but together, when struggle had been shared rather than hidden, when love had been the only currency that mattered. He cooked too, learning from her, asking questions about ingredients and techniques, rediscovering a connection that had been buried under years of distance and distraction, under the demands of a life that had pulled him away from what truly mattered. They smiled again, genuine expressions that reached their eyes and lingered on their faces. Not the practiced smiles of social obligations or the forced cheerfulness of people pretending everything was fine, but real joy born from real connection. From knowing they were safe with each other, that no performance was required, that they could simply be. She laughed at his terrible jokes, the ones she had always laughed at when he was young, the ones his wife had rolled her eyes at, finding them beneath her sophistication. He listened to her stories, the ones she had told 100 times before, finding new meaning in them now, understanding that they were not just stories but lessons, not just memories but maps of how to live with dignity, even when life tried to strip it away. Peace slowly returned, not all at once but in small increments, in moments when she slept through the night without nightmares, in mornings when she woke without the immediate rush of fear, in afternoons when she sat by the window reading without checking over her shoulder to see who was watching, who was judging, who was waiting to punish her for taking up space. The weight lifted from her shoulders day by day, the hunched posture gradually straightening, the fear slowly draining from her eyes, replaced by something that looked like hope, like the belief that maybe this was real, maybe this would last, maybe she was finally allowed to rest after a lifetime of fighting. He watched her heal and felt his own healing happening in parallel, the guilt and rage that had consumed him those first weeks, slowly transforming into gratitude, into determination, into a clarity about what mattered that he had somehow lost in his pursuit of success. His former life seemed increasingly distant, increasingly irrelevant. The divorce proceedings nothing more than paperwork formalizing what had already ended the night he found his mother in the rain. His children visited sometimes, awkward at first, but gradually warming as they saw their father truly happy for perhaps the first time in their lives. As they got to know their grandmother not as a burden to be tolerated, but as a person with stories and wisdom and a strength that their comfortable lives had never required them to develop. The lesson was clear, written in every meal shared, every conversation held, every peaceful evening that proved what he had learned too late but not too late to matter. Never turn your back on the one who gave you life, not for money, not for status, not for anyone who would ask you to choose between them and your humanity. Success means nothing if it requires you to abandon the people who made your success possible, if it demands you close your eyes to suffering happening in your own home, if it asks you to value comfort over conscience and appearance over love. The rain still fell sometimes, but now they watched it together from the safety of their small apartment, warm and fed and safe. And when he saw his mother smile at the sound of it, no longer flinching at the memory of standing cold and wet, with her hand extended, he knew that this life, this simple, modest, authentic life, was worth more than everything he had given up to claim it. That finding her that night had not been a tragedy, but a salvation. Rescuing not just her, but himself from a beautiful prison where success had become synonymous with cruelty and family had become a performance rather than a bond, where he had almost lost the one thing that had always mattered most, the love of the woman who had given him everything long before the world had given him anything at all.